The heat rose from the desert floor, like the breath of some sleeping giant, shimmering and twisting the horizon until nothing looked real. Dust devils danced between the sagebrush and tumbleweeds rolled lazy across the cracked earth, following no path but the whim of the wind. In the town of Copper Falls, the sun beat down merciless on adobe walls and wooden storefronts, driving decent folk indoors during the worst of the afternoon hours. Only the desperate or the foolish ventured out when the temperature climbed past bearable. Sarah McKenna was both. She stood in the shade of Martinez's general store, her calico dress already damp with sweat despite the early hour, watching the empty street with eyes the color of storm clouds. Her dark hair was pinned back severe, not a strand out of place, though the heat made her want to tear it all down and let it fall free. But Sarah McKenna had learned long ago that appearances mattered, especially when you were a woman alone in a town that ate the weak for breakfast. 3 months since Jacob died, 2 months since the bank notice, 1 month since she'd sold everything worth selling just to keep food on the table. And now this morning, the final notice tucked into her reticule like a death sentence. 30 days to pay what she owed, or lose the boarding house that was all she had left of the life they'd built together. The boarding house sat at the edge of town, 2 stories of weathered wood and broken dreams. It had been Jacob's idea, back when copper prices were high and miners flooded into Copper Falls with pockets full of ore dust and hope. "Build it and they will come," he'd said, and for a while they had. But copper played out faster than anyone expected, and the miners drifted away like smoke, leaving behind empty rooms and unpaid debts. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter despite the heat and stepped into the street. The dust was ankle-deep and fine as flour, coating her boots and the hem of her dress with each step. She'd walked this path so many times she could do it blind, but today felt different, final, like she was walking to her own burial. The bank stood solid and imposing, its brick facade the only building in town that looked like it belonged somewhere civilized. Sarah climbed the steps slowly, her hand trembling as she reached for the brass handle. Inside, the air was cooler, but no less oppressive. Mr. Henderson sat behind his mahogany desk, like a spider in its web, all sharp angles and calculating eyes. "Mrs. McKenna," he said without looking up from his papers, "I trust you have what we discussed." Sarah remained standing, her chin raised. "I need more time." Now he looked at her, and she saw pity in his expression. Pity was worse than anger. Anger she could fight. "The bank has been more than patient. Your husband's debts were not mine to inherit. But the property was, and the property serves as collateral." Henderson leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "I have buyers interested, Mrs. McKenna. Good buyers who can pay cash. For half what it's worth. For what it's worth in today's market." His voice was not unkind, but it was final. 30 days, Mrs. McKenna. I can't extend it further." Sarah left the bank with her dignity intact and her hope crushed. She walked the dusty streets of Copper Falls like a woman in a dream, seeing the place as if for the first time, or the last time. The saloon with its bat-wing doors hanging crooked, the doctor's office that doubled as a dentist when needed, the church that only saw congregation on Christmas and Easter, if then. This was her world, small and harsh and unforgiving. But it was hers. She was almost home when she saw him. He stood outside her boarding house like he belonged there, one boot propped up on the porch rail, hat tilted low against the sun. Tall, lean, with the kind of stillness that spoke of a man comfortable with danger. His clothes were travel-worn but quality, and the gun at his hip rode easy, like it was part of him. "You're Mrs. McKenna," he said as she approached. Not a question. "And you are?" "Luke Garrett." He touched the brim of his hat. "I'm looking for a room." Sarah studied him. There was something in his face that reminded her of winter storms, all controlled power and hidden depths. His eyes were green as bottle glass, and when he looked at her, she felt like he was seeing more than she wanted to show. "Most folks who come through here are leaving, not staying," she said. I'm not most folks. What's your business in Copper Falls? That would be between me and whoever I'm conducting it with. His voice was quiet, but carried the weight of authority. Do you have a room or not? Sarah looked at the money she desperately needed, then at this stranger who carried himself like trouble. $5 a week, meals included, no liquor, no gambling, no women of questionable virtue. Fair enough. And no questions about your past or your business. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or respect? That works both ways, Mrs. McKenna. It does. He reached into his vest and pulled out a roll of bills that made Sarah's heart skip. 2 weeks in advance. Her pride wanted to refuse the charity, but her empty stomach and the bank notice in her reticule were louder than pride. She took the money and tucked it away quickly. Room 3, top of the stairs. Breakfast at dawn, supper at sunset. Obliged. He retrieved a worn leather saddlebag from his horse, a big bay stallion that looked like it could run all day and fight all night. Sarah watched him climb the stairs to his room, noting the way he moved, economical and purposeful. When his door closed, she realized she'd been holding her breath. That evening, Sarah prepared supper for 2, something she hadn't done since Jacob died. She made biscuits and beans, fried up some salt pork, and tried not to think about how good it felt to cook for someone again. When she called Luke to the table, he came down clean-shaven and wearing a fresh shirt, though he still carried that aura of barely contained wildness. They ate in silence at first. Sarah had grown used to quiet meals, but this was different. Luke's presence filled the room without him saying a word, and she found herself stealing glances at his hands, his face, the way he held his coffee cup like it might break. Good cooking, he said finally. Thank you. House has good bones. Sarah looked around the dining room, seeing it through his eyes. The wallpaper Jacob had hung himself, faded now but still showing traces of roses and ribbons. The table they'd bought from a drummer passing through, solid oak that would outlast them all. The chair where Jacob used to sit, reading his newspaper and commenting on the state of the world. It was my husband's dream, she said quietly. Was? He died 3 months ago. Fever. Luke nodded like death was something he understood well. I'm sorry for your loss. Are you married, Mr. Garrett? His face went carefully blank. No, ma'am. Ever been? No. But there was something in the way he said it that made her think there was more to the story. Sarah had learned to read the spaces between words, the things people didn't say. Luke Garrett had loved someone once. She was sure of it. The knowledge sat in his shoulders like a weight he'd grown used to carrying. After supper, Luke helped her clear the table without being asked. His hands were gentle with her dishes, careful not to chip the good china she only used for special occasions, or desperate occasions, like trying to impress a paying guest into staying longer. Mrs. McKenna, he said as she hung up her apron, might I ask you something? You can ask. What will you do when the money runs out? The question hit her like a physical blow. She turned to face him, searching his expression for mockery or pity, and finding neither. Just honest curiosity and something that might have been concern. What makes you think the money will run out? House this size, only one guest, bills piling up on your desk. You cook like a woman feeding an army but buy food for 2. He shrugged. I notice things. And what do you think I should do about it? Luke was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the lamplight. Survive, he said finally, whatever it takes. That night, Sarah lay in her empty bed and thought about Luke Garrett's words. Survive, whatever it takes. Easy enough to say, harder to do when you were a woman alone in a town that had no use for you. She'd tried everything she could think of, taking in laundry, sewing, even cleaning the saloon after hours when no one would see. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. She woke before dawn to the sound of voices outside. Male voices, low and urgent. Sarah crept to her window and peered through the curtain. 3 men stood in her yard, and even in the dim light, she could see they were trouble. They wore their guns like they knew how to use them, and there was something predatory in the way they moved, circling like wolves. "You sure he's here?" one of them asked. "Intel says so." Luke Garrett, traveling alone, fits the description. Sarah's blood went cold. Whatever Luke Garrett's business was, it had followed him to her door. She grabbed her robe and crept downstairs, meaning to wake him. But the front door stood open, and Luke was already gone. His horse was missing from the stable, and his room looked like he'd left in a hurry. The men were still out there when the sun came up, waiting and watching. Sarah made herself go about her morning routine, feeding the chickens, sweeping the porch, acting like she hadn't seen them. But her hands shook as she worked, and she jumped at every sound. They approached her as she hung laundry on the line. "Morning, ma'am," the leader said. He was a big man with cruel eyes and a smile that didn't reach past his mouth. "We're looking for a friend of ours. Luke Garrett. You seen him around?" "I might have," Sarah said carefully. "Depends on why you're asking." "He owes us money." Sarah had heard that lie before. Men like this didn't chase debts, they chased blood. "Haven't seen anyone by that name." The man's smile widened. "Now that's interesting, because his horse was in your stable not an hour ago." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. "Then you just missed him, didn't you?" "Seems like it." He stepped closer, and Sarah caught the stench of whiskey and tobacco on his breath. "Thing is, we think he might come back. And when he does, we'll be waiting." They made camp in her yard. 3 armed men with nothing but time and bad intentions, turning her home into a battleground she'd never asked for. Sarah went through the motions of her day, cooking, cleaning, trying to pretend everything was normal while her world fell apart around her. Luke returned at sunset. Sarah saw him first, a shadow moving against the orange sky, leading his horse on foot to avoid making noise. The men in her yard saw him too, and suddenly the air crackled with tension, thick as summer lightning. "Luke Garrett!" the leader called out, rising from his bedroll with his hand on his gun. "Been waiting for you!" Luke stopped about 30 yards away, still holding his horse's reins. In the fading light, he looked like something carved from stone, immovable and eternal. "Benson," he said, and his voice carried clearly across the yard. "Figured you'd catch up eventually. You know why we're here. I know you think I killed your brother." "I know you did." Luke was quiet for a moment. "Maybe I did." Doesn't change the fact that he drew first. Self-defense? Benson laughed, harsh and bitter. "That what you call it when you gun down a 17-year-old kid?" "I call it staying alive." Sarah watched from her window, her heart in her throat. She could see the way this would end, had seen it played out a dozen times in towns like this. Good men and bad men, it didn't matter. They all bled the same color. "You brought this to an innocent woman's door," Luke said, his voice cutting through the tension. "That's on you, not me." "Innocent?" Benson's gaze flicked to the house, and Sarah stepped back from the window. "Lady's been harboring a wanted man. Makes her part of it. Leave her out of this. Too late for that." The shooting started without warning. Sarah threw herself to the floor as bullets shattered her windows, splintered her doorframe, turned her home into a war zone. She crawled to the kitchen, grabbed the shotgun Jacob had kept behind the flour barrel, and tried to remember if she'd loaded it. Outside, men shouted and cursed. Guns barked like angry dogs. Sarah heard one of them cry out, then silence that was somehow worse than the noise. When it was over, Luke Garrett stood alone in her yard. Sarah opened what was left of her front door and stepped onto the porch. 2 men lay motionless in the dust. The third, Benson, sat propped against her fence post, pressing a bloody hand to his shoulder. "Told you to leave her out of it?" Luke said quietly. Benson looked up at him with eyes full of hate and pain. This ain't over. Yes, it is. Luke's voice was flat, final. You come after me again, you won't get the chance to walk away. And if you even think about bothering Mrs. McKenna, I'll hunt you down and finish what we started here. Benson struggled to his feet, swaying but upright. He looked at Sarah, then at Luke, and whatever he saw in Luke's face made him back down. He whistled, and his horse came running. Getting into the saddle nearly killed him, but he managed it. This ain't over, he said again, but there was no conviction in it. Yes, Luke said quietly. It is. They watched Benson ride away into the gathering darkness. Only when he was gone did Sarah realize she was still holding the shotgun, her knuckles white around the stock. You hurt? Luke asked, turning to her. Sarah shook her head, not trusting her voice. I'll bury them, he said, nodding toward the two bodies. Clean this up. Luke. Her voice came out as a whisper. What did you do? He looked at her for a long moment. What I had to do. That night, after the bodies were buried and the blood washed away, they sat on her porch in the darkness. The air still held the heat of the day, but a breeze had picked up, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. I'm sorry, Luke said finally. For what? Bringing trouble to your door. You didn't deserve that. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Are you really a killer, Luke? Yes. The simple honesty of it hit her harder than any elaborate excuse would have. Why? Because sometimes killing is the only way to keep living. And Benson's brother? Luke was quiet for so long Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Kid drew on me in a saloon in Tombstone. Had something to prove, I guess. I tried to walk away, but he kept pushing. Called me out in front of the whole place. So you killed him. So I lived. Luke turned to look at her, and in the moonlight his eyes were haunted. I've been running from that moment ever since. From men like Benson who want blood for blood. From lawmen who see wanted posters before they see the truth. From myself, mostly. Sarah studied his profile in the darkness. How long have you been running? 3 years. That's no kind of life. No, he agreed. It's not. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Somewhere an owl called, and coyotes yipped in the distance. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds, as if the violence of the afternoon had never happened. I have to leave, Luke said eventually. Sarah's heart clenched, though she couldn't say why. She barely knew this man, and what she did know should terrify her. But somehow, sitting here in the darkness with him, she felt safer than she had in months. Where will you go? Doesn't matter, just away from here. More men will come. Maybe. Probably. Sarah turned to face him fully. Then stay. Luke's head snapped up. What? Stay, she said again, the words coming faster now as the idea took shape. Marry me. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Sarah felt heat flood her cheeks, but she pressed on. It's practical, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. You need a place to stop running. I need. She gestured helplessly at the house, the town, the impossible situation she'd found herself in. I need help. A husband would give me standing in this town, protection, and a married woman with a husband can make a go of a boarding house in a way that a widow alone never could. Luke stared at her like she'd grown a second head. You're asking me to marry you. I'm proposing a business arrangement. The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but she forced them out. Room and board, a share of whatever profits there might be, and a legal name that's not on any wanted posters. In exchange for protection, help with the business, and... She took a shaky breath. And the respectability of marriage. Sarah. His voice was gentle. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking. She stood up, pacing the length of the porch. I know you're a dangerous man with a violent past. I know you've killed people. I know men like Benson will keep coming, and I know that life with you would be nothing like the quiet existence I had with Jacob." She stopped pacing and looked at him directly. "I also know that in 2 weeks I'll lose this house and everything I have left. I know that a woman alone in a place like Copper Falls has exactly 3 options: marriage, prostitution, or starvation. And I know that you're the first man who's looked at me like I'm worth something since my husband died." Luke was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "What kind of marriage are you talking about?" Sarah felt her cheeks burn. "Whatever kind you want it to be." "And if I said I wanted a wife in name only? Separate rooms, separate lives, then that's what we'd have. And if I said I wanted more?" Sarah's breath caught. The idea of more, of this dangerous, complicated man touching her, holding her, should have terrified her. Instead, it sent heat racing through her veins. "Then we'd have that too," she whispered. Luke stood slowly, crossed to where she stood at the porch rail. He was close enough that she could smell leather and gunpowder and something uniquely him. Close enough that she could see the war being fought behind his eyes. "I'm not a good man, Sarah. I don't need a good man. I need a strong one." He reached out slowly, as if she might bolt, and touched her face. His palm was calloused and warm, and Sarah found herself leaning into the contact. "You deserve better than this," he said softly. "Maybe. But this is what I've got." Luke studied her face for a long moment, and Sarah held her breath. Everything hung in the balance: her future, her home, her life. All of it waiting on the decision of a man she'd known for exactly 1 day. "All right," he said finally. Sarah's knees nearly gave out with relief. "All right. We'll do it. On one condition." "What?" Luke's hand was still cupping her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "If you ever want out, if this life gets too hard, or I get too dangerous, or you just decide you made a mistake, you tell me and I'll leave. No questions, no arguments." "Luke." "I mean it, Sarah. You say the word, and I'm gone." Sarah covered his hand with hers, holding it against her face. "And what if you decide you want out?" Something flickered in his eyes. "That won't happen." "How can you be sure?" Luke was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Because I've been dead for 3 years, and you're the first thing that's made me feel alive." They were married the next morning. Reverend Patterson performed the ceremony in the parlor of Sarah's boarding house, with Mrs. Chen from the laundry as witness. Sarah wore her best dress, the blue silk she'd saved for special occasions, and Luke had somehow produced a ring, a simple gold band that fit her finger perfectly. The words were the same ones she'd spoken to Jacob 5 years earlier, but they felt entirely different. With Jacob, marriage had been about love and hope and building a future together. With Luke, it was about survival and necessity and 2 broken people trying to make something whole. But when Luke slipped the ring onto her finger and spoke his vows in that quiet, steady voice, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. After the ceremony, Mrs. Chen went back to her laundry, and Reverend Patterson went back to his church, leaving Sarah alone with her new husband. They stood in the parlor, suddenly awkward with each other, the reality of what they'd done settling in. "Well," Sarah said finally. "Well, I suppose we should discuss arrangements." Luke nodded. "Your house, your rules. Our house now." Something flickered in his expression. "Right, our house." Sarah twisted the new ring on her finger, the gold still foreign and strange. "I know this isn't... we both know what this is." "Do we?" She looked up at him, surprised by the question. "It's a business arrangement. A practical solution to both our problems." Luke was quiet for a moment. "Is that all it is?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities Sarah wasn't ready to examine too closely. She looked away, focusing on the dust motes dancing in the morning sunlight. "It's enough," she said quietly. "For now. For now." That first week as husband and wife passed in a strange sort of dance. They were polite with each other, careful, like two people sharing a house with a stranger. Luke moved his things into the room next to hers, and they established routines around each other. He rose early to tend the horses and check the property. She cooked breakfast and tidied the house. They ate their meals together, speaking of safe topics, the weather, the need for repairs around the house, the handful of travelers who stopped for the night. But Sarah was aware of him constantly, the sound of his boots on the floor above, the sight of him working in the yard, shirt sleeves rolled up against the heat, the way he said her name, not Mrs. McKenna anymore, but Sarah, soft and careful like he was afraid he might break it. And she caught him watching her too, when she hung laundry on the line, when she swept the front porch, when she stood at the kitchen window looking out at the desert. His gaze felt like a physical touch, and more than once she found herself blushing for no reason she could name. The change in town attitude was immediate and dramatic. Where before Sarah had been met with pitying looks and whispered gossip, now she was Mrs. Garrett, wife of a man who clearly knew how to handle himself. The ladies at church were suddenly interested in her opinion on everything from recipes to politics. Mr. Henderson at the bank tipped his hat when she passed. Even the rough men who drank at the saloon gave her respectful nods. "It's amazing," she told Luke one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. 5 days ago, I was a charity case. Now I'm a respectable married woman." "Marriage has a way of changing how people see you," Luke agreed. "Is that why you agreed to it? To change how people see you?" Luke was quiet for a moment, rolling a cigarette with practiced ease. "Partly. And the other part?" He lit the cigarette and took a long drag before answering. "You needed help. And you wanted to help me?" "Yes." "Why?" Luke turned to look at her, and in the twilight his eyes were dark and unreadable. "Why does any man want to help a woman?" Sarah felt heat creep up her neck. "Luke, it's getting late," he said, standing abruptly. "I should check the horses." He left her sitting on the porch, her heart racing and her mind spinning with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. The first real test of their arrangement came 2 weeks into the marriage. Sarah was in the kitchen making breakfast when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. She looked out the window and felt her blood turn to ice. 6 men rode into her yard like they owned it. They were hard-looking men, the kind who made their living with guns and violence. Their leader was a giant of a man, with cold blue eyes and a star pinned to his vest. A marshal. Sarah wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the front door, trying to project calm she didn't feel. Luke appeared from the direction of the stable, moving with that easy, deceptive casualness that she was learning meant he was ready for trouble. "Morning," the marshal called out. "I'm looking for Luke Garrett." "You found him," Luke replied. The marshal swung down from his horse, hand resting on his gun butt. "Marshal Coleman, you're under arrest for the murder of Billy Benson." Sarah's heart stopped. This was it then, the end of their fragile new life before it had barely begun. "Billy Benson drew on me," Luke said calmly. "There were 30 witnesses. That's for a judge to decide." Coleman gestured to his men. "Boys." "Wait." Everyone turned to look at Sarah. She stepped off the porch and walked toward the marshal, every eye on her. "Marshal Coleman, is it?" "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Mrs. Garrett. Sarah Garrett." She put a slight emphasis on the name, making sure everyone heard it. "And before you arrest my husband, I think you should know a few things." Coleman's eyes narrowed. "Such as?" "Such as the fact that 3 men came to my property looking for Luke. They made camp in my yard without permission, threatened me, and when my husband returned, they opened fire first." Sarah kept her voice steady, authoritative. "I saw the whole thing from my window. That's not what Benson told me. With respect, Marshal, Benson is a wanted man himself." Did you know that when you took his word over mine? Coleman hesitated. What are you talking about? Sarah reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a crumpled wanted poster. She'd found it among Luke's things and had been saving it for exactly this moment. Tom Benson, she read aloud. Wanted for bank robbery in El Paso, cattle rustling in New Mexico, and murder in Arizona territory. $500 reward, dead or alive. Coleman took the poster, studied it with growing consternation. Where did you get this? My husband brought it to my attention when Benson made his threats. He thought I should know what kind of men were threatening me. It was a lie, but a believable one. Sarah watched Coleman's face as he processed the information, saw the moment when his certainty began to crack. Even if this is true, Coleman said finally, it doesn't change the fact that your husband killed Billy Benson. In self-defense, after Billy drew first, Sarah stepped closer to the marshal. Marshal Coleman, you seem like a reasonable man, a fair man. But you're listening to the word of a known criminal over that of a married woman trying to protect her home. She gestured toward the house, toward the life she and Luke were trying to build. My husband and I are trying to make an honest living here. We're not bothering anyone, not breaking any laws. But if you take him away based on the lies of a man like Tom Benson, you might as well pin that star to your hat and work for the outlaws directly. Coleman looked at the poster again, then at Luke, then back at Sarah. She held her breath, praying that her gamble would pay off. Ma'am, Coleman said slowly, I appreciate your position, but I still have to investigate this shooting. Of course, Sarah said quickly, and will cooperate fully. But surely you can see that arresting my husband based solely on the word of a wanted criminal isn't justice. It's just convenient. One of Coleman's deputies whispered something in his ear. The marshal frowned, looked at the wanted poster again, and finally nodded. Mr. Garrett, he said, you'll make yourself available if I need to question you further. Yes, sir. And Mrs. Garrett, if what you're telling me is true, then I appreciate your honesty. It's all true, Marshal. Coleman mounted his horse, but paused before riding away. One more thing, ma'am. That husband of yours has quite a reputation. Yes, he does. As a man who protects his family, something that might have been respect flickered in the marshal's eyes. Good day, Mrs. Garrett. They watched the lawmen ride away in silence. Only when they were completely out of sight did Sarah allow herself to breathe again. That was well done, Luke said quietly. Sarah turned to look at him. You're not angry? About the lies? They weren't lies. Benson is wanted. His men did threaten you, and they did shoot first. Luke's expression was unreadable. You just emphasized certain aspects of the truth. I protected what's mine. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Luke's eyes darkened, and for a moment Sarah thought he might reach for her. Instead, he touched the brim of his hat. Thank you, he said simply. That evening, Luke found Sarah in the kitchen washing dishes. She was humming softly to herself, something she hadn't done since Jacob died, and the sound made his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name. Sarah. She turned, and he was struck again by how lovely she was. Not beautiful in the flashy way of saloon girls, but genuinely lovely, with intelligent eyes and a mouth that was made for smiling. Yes? What you did today? He struggled for words. No one's ever stood up for me like that. Sarah dried her hands on her apron. We're married, Luke. That makes us partners. Business partners. Yes. But there was something in her tone that made him think she might be questioning that definition as much as he was. Luke crossed the kitchen slowly, giving her time to step away if she wanted to. She didn't. Sarah, he said again, and this time her name came out rougher than he'd intended. What are you doing, Luke? I don't know. He reached out and touched her face, the way he had the night she'd proposed to him. Her skin was soft and warm, and when she leaned into his palm, Luke felt something crack open in his chest. "This isn't what we agreed to," she whispered. "No, it's not. It could complicate things. It could." Sarah reached up and covered his hand with hers. "I'm scared. Of me? Of this. Of wanting something I might not be able to keep." Luke understood that fear. He'd been living with it for 3 years. "I can't promise you forever, Sarah. I don't know what my life is going to look like from one day to the next. I know. But I can promise you that as long as I'm here, I'll take care of you. I'll protect you. And I'll never lie to you. And I can promise you that as long as you want to be here, you'll have a home." Luke leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met soft and tentative at first, then with growing certainty. Sarah tasted like hope and home, and when she sighed into his mouth, Luke felt like he could conquer the world. When they broke apart, Sarah rested her forehead against his chest. "What happens now?" "I don't know," Luke said honestly. "We take it one day at a time. That's not much of a plan. It's all I've got." Sarah pulled back to look at him. "Then I guess it'll have to be enough." That night, Luke moved his things into Sarah's room. Not because they'd discussed it, not because they'd made any grand declarations, but because when bedtime came, neither of them suggested he sleep anywhere else. They lay in the darkness, careful not to touch, but acutely aware of each other. Sarah listened to Luke's breathing, steady and deep, and marveled at how different it felt to share a bed with him. With Jacob, she'd felt safe and loved and comfortable. With Luke, she felt electric, like every nerve in her body was suddenly awake. "Sarah?" "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me a reason to stop running." Sarah turned toward him in the darkness, though she couldn't see his face. "Thank you for giving me a reason to keep fighting." Luke reached out and found her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Partners?" "Partners." The word meant more now than it had when they'd first agreed to this arrangement. Then it had been about business, about practical solutions to practical problems. Now it was about something deeper: trust, affection, the possibility of love. Summer deepened, and with it, Sarah and Luke's partnership. They fell into rhythms that felt natural and right. Luke rose before dawn to tend the horses and check the property for signs of trouble. Sarah made coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and breakfast hearty enough to fuel a working man through the morning heat. They spoke little in those early hours, but the silence was comfortable, companionable. Word spread that the boarding house was under new management, and slowly, carefully, guests began to return. Not the rough miners and drifters of before, but respectable travelers, drummers selling goods between towns, families moving west, even the occasional preacher or school teacher. Sarah suspected Luke had something to do with the change in clientele, though he never said as much. "How do they know?" she asked one evening, as they watched a well-dressed merchant load his wagon for an early morning departure. "Know what?" "That this is a safe place now. That they won't be robbed or cheated or worse." Luke was quiet for a moment, whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a horse. His hands were steady and sure, and Sarah found herself watching them more often than she should. "Word gets around," he said finally. "What kind of word?" "The kind that says Luke Garrett's woman runs a clean house and treats folks fair, and anyone who causes trouble will answer to Luke Garrett." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest at the casual way he said, "Luke Garrett's woman," like it was a fact as natural as sunrise. "Is that what I am?" she asked. "Your woman?" Luke's hands stilled on his carving. "Is that what you want to be?" The question hung between them like smoke from his evening cigarette. Sarah had been asking herself the same thing for weeks, ever since the night he'd moved into her room, her bed, her life in ways that went far beyond their original agreement. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've never been anyone's woman except Jacob's, and that was different." How different? Sarah struggled to put it into words. Safe. Quiet. Jacob was a good man, a gentle man. Loving him was like sitting by a warm fire on a cold night. And this? Sarah looked at Luke, at the way the lamplight caught the sharp angles of his face, at the controlled power in his movements, at the gun that never left his hip. This is like standing in a lightning storm. Luke's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Dangerous. Terrifying. Exhilarating. Sarah reached out and touched the wooden horse he'd been carving, running her finger along its mane. Beautiful. Luke caught her hand, brought it to his lips, pressed a soft kiss to her palm. The simple gesture sent heat racing up her arm and straight to her heart. "Sarah," he said, and her name sounded like a prayer. "What?" "I need you to know something." The seriousness in his tone made her stomach clench. "What is it?" "When I agreed to marry you, I thought I was doing you a favor, giving you protection, respectability, a way to keep your home." Luke's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I didn't expect." "What?" "This. You. The way you make me feel." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "How do I make you feel?" "Like maybe I'm not as lost as I thought I was." The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability he was showing her, made Sarah's eyes sting with unshed tears. She pulled her hand free from his and reached up to cup his face. "Luke Garrett," she said softly, "you are many things. Dangerous, complicated, haunted by whatever brought you to my door. But lost? Number. You're exactly where you're supposed to be." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, like a man drowning, and she was air. Sarah kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all her confused feelings into the connection between them. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Bed," Luke said roughly. "Yes." They made love that night like people who had finally stopped pretending they were anything other than what they were. Two souls who had found each other in the wilderness and decided to build something real together. Luke was gentle but thorough, patient but passionate, and when Sarah cried out his name as pleasure crashed over her, she knew there was no going back. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, sweat cooling on their skin as the desert night air drifted through the open window. "I love you," Sarah whispered into the darkness. She felt Luke go still beside her, and for a moment she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Then his arms tightened around her. "I love you too," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "God help me, Sarah, but I love you too." The next morning brought news that changed everything. Sarah was hanging laundry when she saw the dust cloud on the horizon. A single rider, moving fast, and something about the way he rode made her stomach clench with foreboding. She called for Luke, who emerged from the barn with that instant alertness she'd learned to recognize. The rider was young, maybe 16, with the lean build of a cowboy and eyes older than his years. He pulled up in their yard in a cloud of dust and dismounted before his horse had fully stopped. "You Luke Garrett?" he asked. "I am." "Got a message for you." The kid pulled a folded paper from his shirt pocket. "From a lady in Tombstone. Says it's urgent." Luke took the paper, and Sarah saw his face go pale as he read it. His hands were steady, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched. "What is it?" she asked. Luke looked up at her, and she saw something like grief in his eyes. "I have to go." "Go where?" "Tombstone." He folded the paper and tucked it into his vest pocket. "There's someone I need to help." Sarah felt cold despite the heat of the day. "Who?" Luke was quiet for a long moment. "Her name is Elena. Elena Vasquez. We were involved before I started running." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Another woman. Of course there was another woman. Men like Luke didn't go through life alone. "She's in trouble?" Sarah managed to ask. Her brother was killed. The same men who've been hunting me. She says they're coming for her next, and she doesn't have anywhere else to turn. Sarah nodded, trying to keep her expression neutral. Then you have to help her. Sarah. How long will you be gone? Luke's face was carefully blank. I don't know. Days? Weeks? I don't know, he said again, and Sarah heard the apology in his voice. She turned away, unable to look at him. I'll pack your things. Sarah, wait. She kept walking toward the house. The young man looks hungry. I'll fix him something to eat before he rides back. Sarah, please. She stopped but didn't turn around. What? This doesn't change anything between us. Doesn't it? Luke was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he said finally, and the honesty hurt worse than any lie could have. Sarah spent the rest of the day in a haze of activity. She packed Luke's saddlebags with food and clean clothes. She fed the messenger and sent him on his way. She tended the garden and cleaned rooms that were already spotless and tried not to think about the look in Luke's eyes when he'd read that message. Elena. The name sat in her chest like a stone. Luke found her in the kitchen as the sun was setting, washing dishes that were already clean. I'll leave at first light, he said. Sarah nodded without turning around. Be careful. Sarah, look at me. She dried her hands on her apron and turned to face him. Luke looked haggard, older than he had that morning. I meant what I said last night, he said. About loving you. I know. Do you? Sarah studied his face, looking for lies, for doubt, for any sign that the love he'd professed was anything less than real. She found none. Yes, she said quietly. I believe you love me, just like I believe you loved her first. Luke flinched like she'd slapped him. It's not like that. What is it like? It's complicated. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. Everything about you is complicated, Luke Garrett. Your past, your enemies, your relationships. I knew that when I married you. Then why do you look like you're saying goodbye? The question hung in the air between them. Sarah wanted to lie, to tell him she was fine, that she understood, that she'd be waiting when he returned. But she'd promised him honesty, and she owed him that much. Because I don't know what you'll find when you get to Tombstone, she said quietly. I don't know if the woman you used to love is the same woman who sent for you. I don't know if seeing her again will remind you of who you were before you came here. And you think I'll choose her over you? I think you'll choose whatever feels most real to you in that moment. Luke crossed the kitchen in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. This is real, he said fiercely. What we have, what we've built together, it's real. I know. Then trust me. Sarah looked up into his green eyes, saw the sincerity there, the desperation. I'm trying. That night they made love with a desperate intensity, like they were trying to memorize each other, to imprint themselves on each other's souls. Luke worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, and Sarah gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. When it was over, they lay in the darkness, Sarah's head on Luke's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Promise me something, she whispered. What? Promise me that whatever happens in Tombstone, you'll come back and tell me. Don't just disappear. Don't let me wonder. Luke's arms tightened around her. I promise, even if you decide you want to be with her, even then. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to memorize this moment, the feel of his skin against hers, the sound of his breathing, the way his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. I love you, she said. I love you too. But as Sarah drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that love might not be enough. Luke left before dawn, as promised. Sarah woke to find his side of the bed empty and cold, though she could still smell his scent on the pillow. She found a note on the kitchen table, written in his careful script. Sarah, I don't know what I'll find in Tombstone, but I know what I'm leaving here. You, U.S. A life worth coming back to. Don't give up on me. L. Sarah folded the note and tucked it into her apron pocket, next to her heart. The days passed slowly without Luke. Sarah threw herself into work, taking in extra laundry, tending the garden, preparing rooms for guests who might never come. She tried not to count the days, tried not to imagine what might be happening in Tombstone, tried not to picture Luke with another woman. She failed at all three. On the fifth day, Marshall Coleman returned. This time he came alone, his badge catching the morning sun as he dismounted in her yard. "Mrs. Garrett," he said, touching his hat brim. "Marshall, what can I do for you?" "Looking for your husband." Sarah's heart lurched, but she kept her voice steady. "He's not here." "Where is he?" "Tombstone. Family business." Coleman's eyes narrowed. "What kind of family business?" "The kind that's none of yours, Marshall. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you straight. Is your husband involved in anything illegal?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "My husband is helping a friend in need." "If that's illegal in your territory, Marshall, then perhaps you need to reconsider the laws you're enforcing." Coleman studied her for a long moment. "You're mighty loyal to a man you barely know." "I know him well enough." "Do you? Do you know about his time in Mexico? About the men he killed in Abilene? About the bank robbery and—" "I know about his past," Sarah cut him off. "All of it. And I know the man he is now." "And what man is that?" "A good one." Coleman shook his head. "Ma'am, with all due respect, good men don't have bounties on their heads." "What bounty?" The marshal reached into his vest and pulled out a folded poster. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the face staring back at her from the wanted notice. "Luke Garrett," Coleman read aloud. "Wanted for murder, bank robbery, and cattle rustling. $5,000 reward, dead or alive." Sarah forced herself to remain calm. "That poster is 3 years old, Marshal, based on testimony from men who are now known criminals themselves. The reward is real. So is my husband's innocence." Coleman folded the poster and tucked it away. "Mrs. Garrett, I like you. You seem like a decent woman caught up in something you don't fully understand. But I've got a job to do." "Which is?" "Bringing your husband in for questioning. And if he's not guilty of the crimes he's accused of, then he'll be cleared and released." Sarah laughed bitterly. "You and I both know that's not how it works, Marshall. A man with Luke's reputation doesn't get fair trials. He gets hemp neckties." Coleman's expression softened slightly. "Ma'am, I can't promise you anything except that I'll do my job according to the law. But I will promise you this. If your husband turns himself in voluntarily, I'll make sure he gets a fair hearing. And if he doesn't, then I'll have to bring him in the hard way." Sarah nodded slowly. "I understand. When is he due back?" "I don't know." "Mrs. Garrett, I don't know," she repeated firmly. "He didn't say—" Coleman tipped his hat. "I'll be back, ma'am. And next time, I might not be alone." Sarah watched him ride away, her mind racing. $5,000 was more money than most people in Copper Falls saw in a lifetime, more than enough to tempt even decent folks into betrayal. That afternoon, she rode into town to send a telegram. The telegraph office was empty, except for old Pete Hawkins, who ran the lines and never met a secret he couldn't keep for the right price. "Afternoon, Mrs. Garrett," Pete said, looking up from his equipment. "What can I do for you?" "I need to send a wire to Tombstone." "Sure thing. Who's it going to?" Sarah hesitated. She didn't know Elena's last name, didn't know where Luke was staying, didn't even know if he was still alive. But she had to try. "Luke Garrett," she said finally. "General delivery." Pete raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment. "What's the message?" Sarah thought for a moment, then dictated, "Marshall coming with bounty hunters. Leave now. Don't come home. I love you, Sarah. Pete wrote it down, counted the words, and named his price. Sarah paid without complaint, though the money came from the household fund she'd been carefully hoarding. "When will it be sent?" she asked. "Within the hour." "Thank you, Pete." "Mrs. Garrett?" Pete's voice stopped her at the door. "I hope your man gets the message in time." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She rode home in the gathering dusk, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she might never see Luke again. The telegram was a warning, but it was also a goodbye. If Luke was smart, and she knew he was, he wouldn't risk coming back to Copper Falls. He'd take Elena and disappear, start over somewhere new, somewhere safe. The boarding house felt empty without him. Sarah went through her evening routine mechanically, feeding the chickens, checking the doors, banking the fire. But every sound made her jump. Every shadow held the possibility of bounty hunters, or marshals, or worse. She was getting ready for bed when she heard horses outside. Sarah froze, her hand on the lamp wick. Multiple riders, moving quiet, but not quiet enough. She blew out the light and crept to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. 5 men sat their horses in her yard. She couldn't make out their faces in the darkness, but she could see the guns on their hips, the way they held themselves like predators, bounty hunters. Sarah's mouth went dry. They must have followed Coleman's trail, must have decided that $5,000 was worth the risk of crossing a federal marshal. A soft knock at her door made her jump. Too soft, too polite. These men weren't here to break down her door and search the place. They were here to wait. "Mrs. Garrett?" a voice called through the wood. "We'd like a word." Sarah grabbed the shotgun from beside her bed and crept downstairs. "What do you want?" "Just to talk, ma'am. About your husband." "He's not here." "We know. We're willing to wait." Sarah pressed her back to the door, mind racing. If she let them in, they might search the house, find Luke's things, realize he'd been living here as more than just a guest. If she didn't let them in, they might decide to take what they wanted anyway. "Ma'am," the voice was patient, reasonable. "We're not here to hurt you. We just want to ask a few questions." Against her better judgment, Sarah opened the door. The man who stepped inside was not what she'd expected. He was well-dressed, clean-shaven, with the sort of face you'd trust to hold your money at the bank. Only his eyes gave him away, cold and calculating like a snake's. "Thank you, Mrs. Garrett. I'm John Wesley. These are my associates." The other men filed in behind him, spreading out through her parlor like they owned the place. All of them were armed, all of them watchful. "What do you want?" Sarah asked, keeping the shotgun trained on Wesley. "Information about Luke Garrett." "I don't know anything." Wesley smiled, and it was the most frightening expression Sarah had ever seen. "Now, Mrs. Garrett, we both know that's not true. You're his wife. His legal wife. That doesn't mean I know his business. Where is he? I don't know. When will he be back? I don't know." Wesley's smile widened. "You seem to not know a lot of things for a woman married to the most wanted man in 3 territories. Sarah's grip tightened on the shotgun. "Maybe because I married him for protection, not love." "Ah." Wesley nodded like this made perfect sense. "A business arrangement." "That's right. Then you won't mind if we wait here for him to return?" Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "I'd mind very much. This is my home. And we'll be respectful guests, won't we, boys?" The other men grunted agreement, but their eyes never stopped moving, cataloging the room, looking for advantages. "How long are you planning to stay?" Sarah asked. "However long it takes." Sarah realized with growing horror that these men meant to make camp in her house, to wait for Luke like spiders in a web. And when he returned, if he returned, they'd kill him for the bounty money. "I need to tend my animals," she said. "Of course. But I'm sure you understand we can't let you leave the property." "I wasn't planning to." "Good. because it would be a shame if something happened to such a lovely home. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Sarah nodded and walked to the kitchen, the shotgun still in her hands. Wesley followed, his presence like a shadow at her back. "You know, Mrs. Garrett," he said conversationally, "there's an easy way to end this." "What do you mean?" "Tell us where Garrett is, and we'll be on our way. No one gets hurt, you keep your home, everyone wins." Sarah turned to face him. "Except my husband. Your husband is a killer and a thief. The world will be better off without him. According to men like you." Wesley's mask slipped slightly. "According to the law. The law says a man is innocent until proven guilty. The law also says $5,000 to whoever brings him in." Sarah saw the truth then, clear as daylight. These men didn't care about justice or the law. They cared about money, pure and simple. And they'd kill anyone who stood between them and their payday. "I told you," she said quietly. "I don't know where he is." "Then I guess we wait." That night was the longest of Sarah's life. The bounty hunters made themselves comfortable in her parlor, taking turns sleeping while others kept watch. Sarah stayed in the kitchen, the shotgun across her knees, listening to their low voices and trying not to think about what would happen when Luke returned. If he returned. Maybe the telegram had reached him in time. Maybe he was already riding hard for the Mexican border, Elena at his side. Maybe he'd realized that his life with Sarah had been nothing more than a brief respite from a destiny that had been chasing him for 3 years. The thought should have brought comfort. Instead, it felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Dawn came gray and hot, promising another scorching day. Sarah made coffee and biscuits, feeding the men who'd invaded her home because she didn't know what else to do. Wesley complimented her cooking with the same cold smile he'd worn the night before. "You're a good woman, Mrs. Garrett," he said. "When this is over, you should think about starting fresh somewhere new. This is my home. Was your home. Once word gets out that you harbored Luke Garrett, decent folk won't want anything to do with you." The casual cruelty of it took Sarah's breath away. These men would destroy her life as thoroughly as they intended to destroy Luke's, and they'd do it with smiles on their faces. "Unless," Wesley continued, "you were to help us bring him in. Show the community that you're on the side of law and order, by betraying my husband, by doing your civic duty." Sarah set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. "And if I refuse?" Wesley's smile turned predatory. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." The second day passed like the first, filled with tension and waiting. The bounty hunters took turns patrolling the property, making sure Sarah didn't try to signal anyone or send word to Luke. They were thorough and professional, and Sarah realized with growing despair that even if Luke did receive her warning, he might not realize the extent of the trap waiting for him. That evening, as Sarah was washing dishes, one of the men came running into the house. "Ryder coming," he announced. Wesley was on his feet instantly. "Garrett?" "Can't tell yet. Still too far out." Sarah's heart stopped. If it was Luke, he was riding into certain death. If it wasn't Luke, it might be Marshal Coleman, which would mean a different kind of trouble entirely. "Mrs. Garrett," Wesley said softly, "if that's your husband out there, you have a choice to make." "What choice?" "You can watch him die, or you can help us take him alive." "Why would you want him alive?" Wesley's smile was all teeth. "Because dead men can't tell you where they've hidden their money." The rider was closer now, close enough that Sarah could make out the shape of him against the setting sun. Her heart lurched as she recognized the bay stallion, the familiar silhouette. Luke. He was riding straight into a trap, and there was nothing she could do to warn him. "That's him," one of the bounty hunters confirmed. Wesley drew his gun, and the other men followed suit. "Mrs. Garrett, you're going to go out on that porch and greet your husband like nothing's wrong. You're going to get him to dismount, to come inside, and then we're going to have a conversation." And if I refuse? Wesley pressed the barrel of his gun to her temple. Then we'll kill you both and tell Marshal Coleman we were defending ourselves. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to think of a way out, any way to save Luke's life. But the men had positioned themselves throughout the house, covering every angle, every escape route. There was no way out. "All right," she whispered. "Smart woman." Sarah walked to the front door on unsteady legs. Through the window she could see Luke approaching, and her heart broke at the sight of him. He looked tired but whole, and when he saw the house, his pace quickened slightly. He was coming home to her. Sarah stepped onto the porch, Wesley's gun hidden but pressed to her back. Luke was close enough now that she could see his face, see the moment when his eyes found her, and lit up with something like joy. "Sarah," he called, swinging down from his horse. "Luke." Her voice came out steady, though her hands were shaking. "I got your telegram," he said, striding toward the porch. "But I had to come back. I had to make sure you were—" He stopped mid-sentence, his gaze moving past her to something he'd seen through the window. His expression went cold and hard, and his hand dropped to his gun. "How many?" he asked quietly. "5. Luke's jaw tightened. "You hurt?" "No." "Good." Luke's eyes met hers, and she saw apology and determination and love all mixed together. "Sarah, I need you to get down." "Luke, don't— Get down!" Sarah threw herself to the porch floor as Luke drew his gun with lightning speed. Wesley's first shot went wide as Sarah's sudden movement knocked him off balance. Luke's shot didn't. The gunfight that followed was brief and brutal. Luke moved like a man possessed, diving and rolling, using the porch posts for cover as bullets flew around him. Sarah pressed herself flat against the wooden boards and prayed to every god she'd ever heard of. When the shooting stopped, 4 men lay dead in her parlor and yard. Wesley knelt in the doorway, clutching a bleeding shoulder. "Should have taken the money," he gasped. Luke stood over him, gun trained on his chest. "Should have left my wife alone." Wesley's eyes flicked to Sarah, who was slowly getting to her feet. "Your wife sent us a telegram. Warned you we were coming." "I know." "Then you know she loves you enough to risk her own life." Luke didn't take his eyes off Wesley. "I know." "What are you going to do now?" "Kill me." Luke was quiet for a long moment. "No. I'm going to let Marshal Coleman deal with you. But if you ever come near my wife again, if you even think about her, I'll hunt you down and finish what we started here." Wesley nodded, understanding the promise for what it was. An hour later, Marshal Coleman arrived with a deputy, drawn by reports of gunfire. He took in the scene, the dead bounty hunters, Wesley's wound, Luke's smoking gun, and sighed heavily. "Well," he said, "this complicates things." "They came to my house uninvited," Sarah said quickly. "They threatened me, held me at gunpoint, used me as bait." "That true?" Coleman asked Wesley. Wesley glared at her but said nothing. "Guess that makes this self-defense," Coleman said finally. "But Garrett, you and I still need to have that conversation." "I know." Coleman looked at Luke for a long moment. "You gonna run again?" "No," Luke said quietly. "I'm tired of running." "Good. Because I'd rather do this civilized-like." Luke nodded and handed over his gun. Coleman took it without comment, then gestured toward his horse. "Sarah," Luke said, turning to her. She crossed the porch and threw her arms around him, holding him tight against her chest. "Don't go." "I have to." "They'll hang you." Luke pulled back to look at her face. "Maybe. Maybe not." "Luke, Sarah, listen to me. Whatever happens, whatever you hear about me, remember this moment. Remember that I love you. Remember that you saved my life by warning me." Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I can't lose you. Not now." "You won't. I promise you won't." "How can you promise that?" Luke cupped her face in his hands. "Because I found something worth living for. Something worth fighting for. And I'm not giving up without a fight." Sarah watched them ride away, Luke's hands bound but his head held high. She stood on the porch until they disappeared into the heat shimmer on the horizon, then slowly went inside to clean up the blood and broken glass. The trial was held in the county seat, 3 days' ride from Copper Falls. Sarah made the journey on Luke's bay stallion, carrying letters from half the town attesting to Luke's character since marrying her. She arrived to find the courthouse packed with people who'd come to see the infamous Luke Garrett finally face justice. The prosecutor was a thin man with a voice like a whip crack who painted Luke as a cold-blooded killer who'd terrorized honest folks across 3 territories. He read from a list of crimes as long as Sarah's arm, each one delivered with theatrical outrage. The defense attorney was older, quieter, but when he stood to present his case, the courtroom went silent. "Gentlemen of the jury," he began, "the man sitting before you is not the same man described in those wanted posters. The man sitting before you is a husband, a protector, a member of a community who has worked to build something good in a harsh land." He called witness after witness to testify to Luke's character. Mrs. Chen spoke about how Luke had helped her repair her laundry after a flash flood. The Reverend testified that Luke had donated money to repair the church roof. 3 different travelers told stories of how Luke had protected them from road agents. But the most powerful testimony came from Sarah herself. "Mrs. Garrett," the defense attorney said gently, "tell the court how you came to know the defendant." Sarah looked at Luke, sitting straight and proud despite the shackles on his wrists. "He came to my boarding house looking for a room. I was in financial trouble. My husband had died, and I was about to lose everything. And what did Mr. Garrett do? He paid for his room in advance. He helped me with repairs around the property. He brought in guests, good people who paid their bills and treated my home with respect. And did he eventually propose marriage to you?" Sarah felt heat flood her cheeks. "Actually, I proposed to him." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The attorney smiled encouragingly. "Why?" "Because I needed protection, and he needed stability, a home, a reason to stop running. And has he given you reason to regret that decision?" Sarah looked directly at the jury, 12 men who held Luke's life in their hands. "Never, not once. Luke Garrett is a good man who's made mistakes in his past. But the man I married, the man who's shared my home and my bed, who's protected me and cared for me and loved me, that man is worth saving." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their foreman stood slowly. "Have you reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of murder in the first degree, how do you find?" Sarah held her breath, her hand pressed to her heart. "Not guilty." Sarah's knees gave out with relief. Luke turned to look at her, and she saw tears in his eyes. "On the charge of bank robbery?" "Not guilty." "On the charge of cattle rustling?" "Not guilty." The judge banged his gavel. "The defendant is free to go." Sarah pushed through the crowd, not caring who she knocked aside in her haste to reach Luke. He caught her in his arms as the deputy unlocked his shackles, spinning her around despite the watching crowd. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "It's over." They rode home together in the golden light of late afternoon, the bay stallion carrying them both across the desert toward Copper Falls. Sarah sat in front of Luke, his arms around her waist, feeling safer than she had in weeks. "What happened in Tombstone?" she asked finally. Luke was quiet for a moment. "Elena's brother was dead when I got there, killed by the same men who'd been hunting me. She was scared, alone, thought they'd come for her next. And I helped her get to family in California. Put her on a train, gave her enough money to start over." Sarah processed this. "That's all? That's all? You and she didn't?" Luke's arms tightened around her. "Sarah, look at me." She twisted in the saddle to face him. "Elena was part of my past. You are my future. There was never any question about that. But you loved her once. I did. The way a boy loves, desperate and consuming and ultimately shallow. Luke's green eyes were steady on hers. What I feel for you is different. Deeper. It's the way a man loves, with his whole soul, forever. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Promise me. What? Promise me no more running, no more secrets. Whatever comes, we face it together. Luke leaned down and kissed her softly. I promise. They crested the ridge that overlooked Copper Falls as the sun touched the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, their boarding house sat solid and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney where Sarah had banked the fire before leaving for the trial. Home, Luke said softly. Home, Sarah agreed. That night, they sat on their porch as they had so many evenings before, watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. But everything was different now. The fear was gone, the uncertainty lifted. They were free to build whatever life they chose. What do we do now? Sarah asked, her head resting on Luke's shoulder. We live, Luke said simply. We take guests, we tend the garden, we watch sunsets from this porch. We grow old together. That sounds perfect. Luke pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Sarah? Thank you. For what this time? For seeing something in me worth saving. For fighting for us. For giving me a reason to stop running and start living. Sarah smiled in the darkness. Thank you for coming to my door that first day. For staying when you could have left. For loving me back. Above them, the desert stars burned bright and eternal, witnesses to two souls who had found each other in the wilderness and decided to build something lasting from the ashes of their broken pasts. The wind carried the scent of sage and the promise of rain, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang to the moon. Luke Garrett had finally come home.